Welcome to the AI and Faith podcast. We are a community of expert technologists, professionals, and faith leaders bringing the ancient wisdom of the world's major religions to the ethics of artificial intelligence. Join us on this new journey and welcome to the conversation.
Amazing and surprising about when ChatGPT first came out, OpenAI, was just how human it was. I think that just scared everyone. At some level, I just think that should excite people of faith who see the potential of, this bringing humanity into our world and accelerating that kind of trajectory.
My name is Elias Kruger, and I will be your host. Today's episode is an interview with two contributors to a recently published anthology, Faithful AI, Stories of Hope from 2045, which is available on Amazon. Author Peter Rothe and essay writer David Kim discuss the intersection of AI and vocation in a thought-provoking conversation. Welcome, everybody. I'm here with Peter Rothe and David Kim, and we're gonna talk about Project Grace. Peter, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit of kind of where the inspiration came from for the story?
The first inkling of Project Grace was actually an idea that I had to do with, as AI progresses, what would be kind of the bottleneck that we might hit in terms of, say we have unlimited performance and we keep pushing. And the two scenarios that kind of always come to mind from listening to podcasts is, oh yeah, we're going to sort of merge with the AI or it will destroy us. And I thought, well, if the AI actually did sort of come close to a semblance of humanity, wouldn't it be it actually started more as a funny sort of joke. What if the AI just decided, like, it just looks at the world and says, I can't deal with this, and shuts itself off? So that's kind of like where the seed began. I thought, that's an interesting thing. And then after that, I thought, what if, they keep running into this problem where the AI keeps turning itself off? And then they've tried the technological approach and they're like, what if we sort of trick the AI to having purpose and faith, and we drag this priest to convert it? And from then the story kind of expanded and I fleshed things out. And then the scenario for the world as well sort of helped structure where it was set and so on.
That's fascinating. I'm always curious and fascinated by how stories come to us. And usually it is not this structure. There's usually an idea that comes and hooks you, and then you kind of develop on that. But you mentioned a little bit about the scenario, because I think it is important, especially for this story. Tell us a little bit more about the scenario or the things that helped you write the story.
In terms of the broad scenario itself, I thought it was more of the flavor of the story kind of aligned with it more, the kind of super hyper commercialization of everything. When I'm thinking about the story, I was trying to ground it as close as possible to, if things stay the same, where are we likely to end up, kind of thing. And I felt like that was the most sort of obvious scenario in my head. And that's why I think in the story there are elements such as, the constant buzz of drones, and I bring in technology which are sort of in the near future, but yet not fully implemented. So it really just helped to ground the story. Hopefully nothing in the story feels unbelievable because of it.
Exactly. I felt like everything was very believable. And, specifically on this scenario where big tech just takes over and we just double down on it, right? And so we do have a world where advances kind of come a little faster even than we expect, but they also come at a certain price. And I think your story kind of starts, getting a little bit into that. What I thought was really interesting is that, and you mentioned a little bit about it, is how the story flips the script on the conversation around technology, right? So we tend to think about what is technology doing to us and how is AI going to change us, change the world. But you actually come and say, wait a minute, what if AI needs help? And, we come here and help. I think it was ironic, a little comic even, but in some ways very powerful. Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of what do you think about that?
It's interesting to track kind of the development of the story. So originally there was several directions in which I could take it. There was the more kind of humoristic approach where I just went full on humor. And then grace came into play, and I knew there would be an element of grace playing, whether it was a character or whether it was with the compassion that the pastor shows at the end. But then I sort of realized as the story was developing that both Larry and Paul sort of had the same issue fundamentally. That was kind of the crux of it. I think Kim put it in a very, very good way, that AI will always be a reflection of our own humanity. And if we are ourselves sort of fallen and lack purpose, we can only ever create something that reflects that. And I think the crux of that actually comes with the character of one of the scientists, she's kind of the stoic one, always focused on the project, kind of continuously pushing to push things forward. So I think in many ways, whatever we create from technology in my story will always be a reflection of, sort of to put it in a theological standpoint, if we make it from a standpoint of fallen humanity, whatever we do will remain fallen.
Additional questions here.
Mm-hmm.
So now the story is about 20 years out, but what are some things that you think that maybe we're already seeing it, or that it kind of applies already to our current technological moment?
I don't know if either of you have seen ChatGPT 4.0 and how that was introduced. And I remember seeing that and thinking to myself, maybe the timing of Project Grace is more like 5 years away rather than 20 years.
Right.
Because I think it was the point in the conversation when the AI was very clearly flirting with him. And it made me think, like, what's the mechanism behind that intention? Like, where does it come from to make a decision in computation to say, actually, the tone of voice I need to take for this situation is a slightly more flirtatious one rather than a more serious one? So there's that. And the other time where it shocked me, so in my job, we're currently in the process of trying to integrate AI within teaching, trying to sort of equip the students on how to navigate the AI scene, really, what tools they can use. We've even had to come up with how to reference AI properly, how to cite those if you're writing sort of academic work. But the day that AI shocked me is when I asked it, we were doing there's this classic chess game where it's Gary Kasparov playing a Deep Blue, and then they sort of draw, and then eventually Deep Blue beats Gary Kasparov. So we did the same thing where a team of us were using the AI, and then we had all our senior sort of design tutors, and we both tackled the same brief to see who would win. So I was in the team AI, and I asked it to draw me a diagram of the solution that we wanted, right? I was expecting it to sort of project these very sci-fi visual graphics that AI tends to create. But instead, it used ASCII code to draw a simple diagram of what the solution was. And it put little labels and things like that. And the reason why this was the moment where I thought it sort of flipped in my head is because that was the AI using the tools it had to draw a picture. We always frame AI in terms of language models and thinking about predicting the next word. But it somehow knew the constraints of the screen that I had. It knew how many lines it needed to go through to put the dashes and sort of the hyphens. And then it managed to draw this diagram showing essentially a solution to a problem that we've made up. I just thought to myself, that is where we're at today.
Right.
And the thing that my colleagues keep repeating is that the technology can only get better. This is as worse as it will ever get.
And the speed of it, right, is just very, very surprising. But that's fascinating that you write the story and then you're at work and now you're encountering things that popped up in the story. So no, that's fascinating. Let me turn a little bit to David and ask a few questions. So David wrote the reflection essay to Peter's story. Can you tell me, like, what most surprised you, like, when you just read the story?
It was certainly the idea of AI getting depressed, like us, and just kind of like shutting down, refusing to work. I love that twist because you typically think of AI as machine, and machines don't quit, and that's one of the kind of hallmarks of what we consider the benefits of machine versus human. And I think in making this machine get depressed, it was brilliant because it forced you to change or think about even your conception of what this technology is, and began to break it out of seeing AI merely as machine. Really force you to think about, okay, what are we dealing with here when it comes to AI?
The story is not necessarily arguing that AI does have some type of soul or that it can feel sadness, right? It's more about kind of acting like humans, right? There's no, the point here is not to say, well, AI is just like humans in the sense of having a soul, but really more about that if it is so much like us, it can actually act like us, right? To the point of being depressed. I want to make sure that was clear. I don't know, Peter or David, if you want to add anything.
And I put several hints at that. There is one point where one of the scientists says, so David goes in questioning, how is it capable of doing all this? And she actually gives a line that says, everything it does, it gets from you, right? So everything that it's portraying there and saying must ultimately come from you. That was my way of acknowledging the fact that, well, my view of AI is I don't think it will necessarily ever come to the point where it will create something totally novel. It will take ingredients from existing things and produce something. That was me saying all the ingredients for what Larry is doing must originate from you. It's not actually coming up with anything right now. That's my kind of very subtle nod towards that view, but then very intentionally in the story I leave it vague on purpose so that the reader can decide what they want.
Now, the story really happens mostly at a workplace. It's kind of in a company, and that opens up this whole idea of workplace and meaning and purpose and all of that. In your essay, you mentioned the correlation between work and love, which I thought was very intriguing. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think, these two words often feel very much at odds with each other and almost feels jarring for a lot of people to hear those two words come together. But when you think about what the modern malaise of work really flows in that disconnection between what we do with the majority of our waking hours and the disconnection of that to what really motivates us as human beings. And again, coming from a kind of a theistic frame as a Christian, I think that concept of the creator of all that is also is defined by love. God is love, as we know, and everything that God creates is an extension of that quality. And so it would make sense in many respects that then the work that we do is also imbued with that quality. And so when that aspect of love or relationality, and maybe a better way of saying that is a relationality is removed, then yeah, we become robotic. And you see kind of the dominance of the machine image really being the modern paradigm of work. I mean, a post-industrial revolution where this idea of efficiency and productivity really begins to capture our imagination when it comes to work and what the paragon of work is versus, pre-industrial revolution. Work was the things that we did to not only survive, but to serve one another, to live in community, to be able to exchange, goods and services so that we could all have a higher quality of life. And so embedded in that pre-industrial understanding of work was the sense that love was a means by which we relate with one another and hopefully love one another because we are interested in the well-being of the other as much as we are our own well-being. So I think the concept of love is being detached from work is actually more of a modern disassociation than something that's been always historically present with work.
That makes a lot of sense when you think about the development of careers being passed on between parents and father and son or mother and daughter. The idea of guilds, the idea that it wasn't like you just picked a job, you really were born into a community that did a certain kind of work. And so that makes a lot of sense. And all of that changes with the modern factory and now the modern office. It's a great reminder. I do have a kind of a follow-up, rethinks a little bit that. So let's say, yes, relationship is back and it's very important. Now, what is the role then of productivity in work?
In some ways, when relationality is brought back into work, you kind of have two effects. One is it begins to change our expectations around time because humans are not machines. And so we cannot produce at an efficiency rate that we would expect from machines, even though I would certainly acknowledge that for many organizations, that is the paradigm that we should work like machines and our productivity should. But any of us who take a little more time to realize that is not what creates best efficiency out of human being. Time is one aspect. And the second is that in some ways, when relationality is brought back in, there's a deeper level of motivation that over time, I would argue, we become more productive because our imaginative capacities are, when our emotions are brought into work, we are much more capable of doing work that inspires and that really, people who love their work are willing to work, more than the 40 requisite hours a week. I think when people align their work with a relationship and the meaning that is endemic in relationships, I would argue our productivity will be much higher than I think what typically people consider productivity. And I think there's a for me, the metaphor, when we look at nature, nature is very fruitful, but it's not necessarily the most productive, at least year round. And understanding the paradigm of nature to be really the dominant way we think about work, I think is a much healthier way of really approaching work than I think, again, the modern mechanistic paradigms.
One of the things that I've done in my own job, I lead a lot of new analysts that are coming in, and we put them through rotations. One of the things that we always ask them is like, what are you interested in? Like what excites you? And we have noticed, you tend to do better work when you like what you're doing, when you have an interest in it. So it's almost like allowing, instead of desire being a problem, desire then becomes an engine for productivity. So it's not like I'm working in spite of wanting to do something else as I work aligned with that. And I think the same works with relationships. I mean, I haven't got to a point of like, who are the people you like to work with? But I think that might be also part of the equation eventually, right? That we would pick not just the work that we want to do, but the people that we want to work with. And I'll tell you, I've had many times in my own career where the work sucked, but the people made it worth it. And
that's right.
And the flip side, where the work was very interesting, but people made it very difficult to want to come to work. So that's great. Again, great reflections there. This month at AI and Faith, we are under the theme of AI uses for ministry. So I thought, David, obviously a lot of your work has been with ministers and the workplace and helping clergy and people on the pews to connect faith at work. But what do you hope that pastors, rabbis, imams, other religious leaders will do to engage with this technology?
I mean, one, I think to recognize, I think the latest 2024 Gallup poll said, in the US, 32% of people are engaged at work, meaning, then you have do the math, and the vast majority of people are not engaged in work. And you think about just the incredible amount of disconnection and the lack of meaning and dehumanization that happens, on a daily basis for how many decades of our lives. And you see the tremendous possibility that then this infusion of this new technology can bring. But it requires a certain imagination to see the potential that AI can really take one of the biggest human problems, which is, again, there's massive problems everywhere, but then just a very mundane reality that 70-some%, I think the statistics are much higher globally, of 70 to 80% of the people around the world are disengaged with what they do day in and day out. That is such a tremendous waste of human potential, but also the way we could, when we think about all the problems all these people could really be working on and thinking about, and then how might AI begin to help move in that direction where people are not only engaged with their work, but are taking their talents, their excitement, their gifts, their resources, and begin to address it both in upstream and downstream problems that we face. And I think right now the AI world can be dominated by a very kind of positivistic philosophy that what you see is what you get. And if that is kind of your prevailing philosophy, then I could totally understand all the both nihilistic and also apocalyptic kind of versions of AI. But I think these faith leaders that you mentioned, if we believe there is a supernatural interjection, and in the case of, I think, this particular story in the Christian worldview, this interjection of grace, that gives us every reason to have a very different imagination on the potential of this technology than I think the mainstream applications currently that are being socialized. I think faith leaders who are soaked and bathed in a supernatural world where what you see is not always what you get. There are things happening beyond what you see, and there are realities that come into play that bring meaning into even things as difficult as pain and suffering and trauma. How might that background, how might that training, how might that awareness of sacred texts really begin to paint a different imagination, a social imagination around AI? And then how do those stories kind of get heard by people in these faiths, so that all of a sudden the dominant understanding of AI becomes hopeful, becomes positive, becomes something that people are excited to employ because they see the way it actually humanizes us all the more, versus I think the dominant metaphors right now are ways that AI dehumanizes us. And I think what's so amazing and surprising about when ChatGPT first came out, OpenAI, was just how human it was. I think that just scared everyone. At some level, I just think that should excite people of faith who see the potential of, this bringing humanity into our world and accelerating that kind of trajectory.
Yeah, I mean, I love your subversive view. I was like AI as a means to humanizing a world as opposed to the symptom of a dehumanizing world. And that's honestly a positive hijacking of the narrative, right? To say, no, no, I know that this is the prevailing view. And this is not to say not to be uncritical, right, or naive about, but to fully engage in the goodness that it can bring through imagination. And I'm very supportive of that. That's really kind of aligns a lot with my own beliefs about AI. So I appreciate you
Well, I
saying
think
that.
this is where the theology, without that theology, I would not have any reason to believe in that more optimistic view.
Sure.
And so, but yeah, that's where to your question, I think the importance of these sacred texts really giving an interjection of a different imaginations becomes so critical in the outplaying of this new technology.
So in other words, I think you're telling religious leaders you have something to bring to this table that you've been, living and ruminating on. Now let's do it. Bring it on to this technology.
Absolutely.
Help us build. I mean, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but is that kind of what you're?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, again, from the Christian perspective, the Bible is not naive about brokenness and evil. And yet, the dominant overarching narrative is one of hope and restoration and renewal. And so, how can that overarching narrative or that meta narrative really begin to inform the way we approach this emerging technology?
Peter, you want to say something? Sound like you.
Yeah, well, I completely agree with that. I mean, I tried to put an element of that in the story. So in the epilogue, there is an AI in the congregation.
Yes, yes.
Right.
That's
So
that's a hopeful future, right?
yes.
Where AI is now coming to church, quote unquote. So that's
Yes, helping out with communion. So there you
there
go.
you go. But we'll have to figure that one out.
Yes.
Part of the idea of the book is obviously to imagine futures, but also to start sparking action in the present, right? So if we get a little bit more practical here, what are some things we can do today to mitigate this growing nihilism, right? And what I mean by that is that you have a profit-driven technocratic system, right, that is always pushing out more gadgets that are doing faster and better, but there's very little purpose, right? I mean, the whole story is about that, right? It's kind of like technology increasing, advancing with little purpose except let's buy more gadgets, right? And so that leads to nihilism where people are like, okay, what's the meaning of life? What am I doing here? So what can we do today to mitigate this growing issue that is, probably only going to become worse?
AI literacy is key to this. So AI is not a panacea, or at least not at the minute, which I think a lot of companies are trying to sell it as. There are obviously risks with that. And I think the more informed someone is, whether in ministry or in work, about the tools, about the limitation, about the trajectory, even to some extent understanding the underlying sort of how it works, how does AI actually work practically? How does it create the output that you have? I think just informs people and makes them understand that this is a tool that you can work alongside with, and that it has the potential to free you in some regards. So I would say literacy, and that's what I've seen as well in my own job, that it's very obvious when somebody has decided to use AI as a panacea, because they will just copy and paste it and then it'll be in their report, and then it's very obvious that they didn't write it. Whereas someone else who might say, okay, I'm going to use the AI as a starting point or a brainstorming partner, and then use that to generate more ideas. So one of the things I was telling my colleagues is that what we want is the process that the students are using to generate the solution to stay the same, but for the AI tool to help within that process. A lot of companies are sort of jumping to the conclusion where the AI is the process.
Having creative uses of AI and beginning to popularize not just all the examples I see on YouTube. It's all efficiency kind of oriented and productivity oriented versus, again, I think if people of faith can really begin to apply new applications that really stretch our imaginations on what AI can do. Even as simple as, when I work with pastors and people work in churches, just giving them helping them use it to create a worship liturgy or help them in their sermon prep. And I say, with the 20% of time that it saves you, who can you meet with? Who can you connect with? And I also will give examples of, like, can you imagine in 5 years for a business meeting, you just, touch the equivalent of what will be our cell phones, and the AI is working out all the strategy, all the potential connections, drawing up the contract. And in the meanwhile, you're just grabbing a drink with someone and getting to know their story. And so business and work becomes more about getting to meet new people, hearing their stories, and allowing the AI to do the work of like negotiations and seeing where the alignment is and where's the efficiencies in your company and my company. And so it just makes, to give that sense of, wow, AI could make my work look like that. And just, even if it doesn't end up there, to kind of get that excitement going, because we can certainly imagine the technology being able to do that in 5 years, if not sooner. But more importantly, like, is that imagination even present to even conceive that that would be a potential direction that, the AIs that are now all on our phones could end up?
So I know of an AI model being built on the Bible and the potential use cases for that. The idea being that the Bible itself being such a cross-reference book, in many ways, the way an AI large language model works by referencing different areas seems to align quite well. And it wouldn't be hard to imagine a scenario where a pastor might run into a particularly challenging text. I'm thinking the bridegroom of blood in Exodus is a particular example. But then by using the AI, you can find additional references. Maybe if there are other sort of biblical sources. My worry, I guess, with the way mainstream AI is working is it actually is going very much in the opposite direction of that, where it might become less practical from a sort of theological standpoint because of the steering of the companies towards a more sort of neutral kind of position, or even a more kind of left-leaning position.
And then finally, I mean, we cover so much ground today, so thanks both of you for your time. But I do want to give an opportunity to say, ask me this question basically, if there's one thing, what is the one thing that you would hope readers would take from your story and the essay?
What I would want for a reader after they read this story is to realize that their identity and their purpose is not situated within work, because that will change and shift as your role and your age and who you are shifts and changes. I put a lot of clues to that, but I think purpose and meaning is found in relation to others and in relation to God. So it's a relational, that's where we find our purpose and meaning. And through that, God does say you have to pastor the world, you have to look after it, nurture it. But the two commandments are love God and love your neighbor as yourself. So I'm hoping that the reader will find maybe a hint of something that might resonate with them in one of the characters, whether that be the two scientists, the older lady, Larry, maybe even, or Grace, and then realize that ultimately they all are facing very similar problems, that it's that relational value that they're missing. And I see the world going in the opposite direction, which just makes me realize how much more we need to bring that message out, how much more the world needs the gospel and stories like this to go out and to permeate our medium in terms of literature and films and podcasts. And in some extent, that's what motivates me to write. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter.
I think when it comes to work, I would hope after reading this that people would get a sense that work is very man or human made. Let me say that, meaning it doesn't always have to be this way because it always hasn't been this way. And can we imagine, if not in the next 5, 10 years, certainly for the next generation, especially when we think about other technologies coming online, things like fusion energy, that's just going to usher in, the Jetson age. And when we can either default to just responding to all the societal pressures and work being kind of a hodgepodge Frankenstein of what's happening in the world, or we can be very intentional and thoughtful about what was work meant to be and what do we want work to be for the next generation, so that instead of 70 to 80% of the world being so disengaged with their work, that people would wake up being excited about the work that they get to do that day, and to see something really beautiful begin to emerge, because all of a sudden people's sense of agency and meaning is just really increased. And I think AI could be a significant help or augmentation to getting us to not only fulfilling those dreams, but also expanding the possibilities of what work can be one day, whether the near or more distant future.
Well, thank you, Peter and David, for your time, for the story and the essay. And Peter, I hope you keep on writing. And David, also you keep on doing the important work that you're doing.
Thank you, Elias. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Peter.
You can find Project Grace and the companion essay in our recently released book, Faithful AI, Stories of Hope from 2045, available at Amazon. Also, check out our previous interviews with other contributors on the book. In the meantime, follow and rate our new podcast on your favorite platform and share it with your friends. Don't forget to follow us on our social media as well. We're on LinkedIn and X. Thank you for joining us today.